So another thing that panicked a few people in the room, including the sound and the booth back there and Pastor Brian, is when I said, I think I'm going to scrap the sermon that I just wrote. I literally said that, and I'm literally doing it. We're still talking about the same subject, but I realized that I just want to have a talk with you. As we were thinking about or writing the sermon series from eyewitness to eyewitness, we're looking at the eyewitness accounts, the earliest eyewitness accounts of Jesus and after the resurrection, and even before the resurrection, but after the resurrection. And we're talking about what they said and where they went and how their testimony shaped the church today. And last week, Pastor Brian talked about the two men on their walk to Emmaus, and they were ignorant because they didn't know that it was Jesus they were walking with until Jesus broke the bread. And then their eyes were open, their hearts were open, and they realized it was Jesus, and they ran back and they told everyone. And then today we're going to talk about someone else, someone who was a disgrace. And as I was thinking about this with regards to Mother's Day, I thought, it's a stretch to talk about being disgraced on Mother's Day. And then I thought, is it really? I honestly have been a disgrace, to my parents. Maybe some of you have done things that you wish you hadn't done or acted out in particular ways. And you just kind of carry that. And I've talked about how that when I had issues with my mom, I'm kind of emotional about it, actually talking about it, from a very young age, and really didn't get along with my mother. And none of the kids did. And then later in life, I was probably, I think around 40 years old, when the Holy Spirit said, you need to make amends with your mom. And you need to start by asking her to forgive you. That was a shocker. And so that's how it all began. I feel like I had let my mom down and she had let me down, but we had this whole moment where it's amazing. Like right now we're getting ready to go see my mom, and she lives in Ohio, and everything is amazing. But it wasn't always like that. So I say that because, this is about, what we're talking about today is about relationship. And we're talking about, I would say, kind of like a parental relationship, because that's the way Jesus is with us. And we're not going to be talking about a woman. We're going to be talking about a man. But it's all related to relationships and who we are and what Jesus is calling us to. So I thought I just want to talk to you. I'm going to read a couple scriptures, and I'm going to talk about someone who really let down Jesus. We're going to talk about Peter. And if we go back and we look at Peter, Peter probably saw more miracles, heard more of Jesus's teachings, witnessed more healings and exorcisms than any other person ever. He was with Jesus by his side. He was his closest companion. He was in his top 3 closest, Peter, James, and John. He saw things and witnessed things and had a relationship with Jesus really like none of the other disciples did. And there's something really human about Peter. Peter was a regular guy. Peter was hardworking. Peter was also very controlling. Peter wanted to do things his own way. Peter was angry. Peter was passionate. He had a lot of good qualities, but he had a lot of bad qualities. But Jesus went to Peter and wanted Peter to be one of his disciples. With all of his mess, I want you to hear that today. With all of his mess and all of his issues, Jesus went to him and said, I want you to follow me. Listen to what Jesus said in a very familiar passage of scripture in Luke chapter 5. One day, as Jesus was preaching on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, great crowds pressed in on him to listen to the word of God. And he noticed 2 empty boats at the water's edge, for the fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. So they're done fishing. Stepping into one of the boats, Jesus asked Simon, its owner, to push it out into the water. So he sat in the boat and he taught the crowds from there. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it is deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing." This is an important thing for Peter right now. He says, "But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again." Really, the first indication of a true disciple is switching what you were going to do and listening to Jesus and following what he says. And this time their nets were so full of fish, they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. And when Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." Here we see a piece of Peter's heart again, that he can be repentant. He saw who Jesus was, and he was humbled before him. It says in verse 9, he was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were also amazed. And Jesus replied to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. Another indication that Peter was going to be someone who was fully in, completely surrendered, passionately following after Jesus. He left everything. And it all began with an invitation to follow, an option. He wasn't forced to follow, but Jesus saw something in him that was worth having. There's another event that happens in Peter's life. And this is where he's been following him for a while. It doesn't say exactly how long, but there's this event that takes place in Luke chapter 6, the following chapter, and Jesus goes and prays, which I love that, because Jesus is showing us what we need to do. When we need to make a big decision, we should go pray. We should go hear from God, hear what he wants, and then live that out. That's what Jesus was teaching us. He went to the mountainside, it says, and he prayed. And when he came back down from praying, he goes, it says, when day came, this is Luke chapter 6, verse 13, he called his disciples and chose from them 12 whom he named apostles. So there were lots of disciples. It wasn't just 12. He had a lot of disciples who were following him. But now he is singling out 12. 12 who would be apostles, 12 who would be leaders, 12 who had a higher calling. So if you want to understand what it meant to be an apostle, it just simply means a messenger. It means a delegate, one commissioned by another to represent him in some way. So Peter was one of those who were called, who were chosen to be an apostle. Peter was given an assignment. I think sometimes we get confused, but we do receive assignments from God. We receive things that we're supposed to be doing here on this earth while we're here, so we can further the kingdom of heaven on earth. And that's what was happening here. And so Peter was one of the people. And as a matter of fact, Jesus gives Peter details about his assignment. In Matthew 16, he says, "Now I say to you that you are Peter," which means rock, "and upon this rock I will build my church. And all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." Peter is elevated to a point of doing unbelievable work for the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus knew it, and he called him to it. He chose him, and he gave this assignment to him. And honestly, I think that from what I can tell, that Peter was honored, but he wrestled with it. You know, to have a calling is something that is very specific. It doesn't have to be complicated, though. We don't have to overcomplicate what this means. So some of us are called to, like, as an example, a vocational calling. Some of us are called to be maybe have a career like a teaching career, or be in medicine, or maybe you're an artist or a social worker, or you're serving others. Maybe you're an entrepreneur. And maybe God has called you and you know how to manage money, and you make money and then you take the money and you give it to others to help them. Maybe you have a spiritual calling, a church leadership like me or others, or a teacher. Maybe you have a moral calling and you are serving in the area of social justice, or you're helping the poor. You know, a calling can come in a lot of different ways. But one thing I know from personal experience is that when you have a calling from God, it doesn't go away. It's like Jonah. You can run as fast as you can to the other side of the world. But if God has placed a calling on you, he's called you to that, and that won't change. Now you may have increased knowledge about what the calling is, but the calling is still there. Even if it happened when you were 8 years old, 9 years old, whatever age you were, maybe you were 65 years old and God called you to do a particular thing. If you haven't done it yet, if you haven't responded yet, it's still there. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not going to go away, even if you want it to go away. Because a calling from God cannot be revoked. That's what it says. Romans chapter 11, verse 25 says, for the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. And if there's anybody who understands that, honestly, that is me, because I didn't think that, even though I felt I was called, I didn't understand what it meant. And then I made a mess of my life. Total disgrace. Total. And blamed God and wallowed around in the mud pit for too long. But the call was still there. But now I had this thing that I was carrying around inside me that I couldn't bear to deal with. And I didn't feel like I could go into a church and really do anything of value. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about Jesus, because why would they even listen to what I had to say? But the calling was still there. The calling was still there. Some of you have been called, and you don't know what it means, but you feel this sense because it's difficult to ignore. So back to Peter. Something else was starting to happen in Peter's life once he was called. Because once someone is called, then you're already in the potter's hand, right? And then all of a sudden, the potter's hand starts going like this. And the potter's hand takes it, and you get thrown on the table. And then the potter's like, and smoothing out something and pulling something and filling in something, and then picked up again and thrown back down. And you're like, yes, that's my life. Okay, maybe you're called. Maybe, why? Because you have to be formed. Because God calls you, he invites you to follow him, and he calls you as you are, and then he forms you into what he wants you to become so that you can be effective. Because we have all this stuff on us. We have all these things that we think we know, and God's like, nope, that's not right. Let me just edit this out a little bit and push here. Sometimes it's our circumstances that cause us to start rethinking and reevaluating. And I say Peter was a piece of work. He needed a lot of that forming and moving and pushing. I mean, for goodness sakes, he was a fisherman, and he was a little rough around the edges. And from what I can tell from my research, Peter was rebuked more than any other disciple. That's not like a good thing to have on your resume. Rebuked by Jesus more than anyone else. That's great. He was the only disciple, too, who dared to rebuke Jesus. And then Jesus called him Satan. I mean, this is like, okay, not anything to be proud of. But Peter, let's be clear here. Peter also took more chances. Peter also stepped out in faith. He's the only one of the disciples who even gave it a second thought to ask Jesus to walk on the water, get out of the boat. And it kind of feels like Peter was in this tug of war. He's in this tug of war of, I want to please Jesus more than anything, and I'm going to try to do it, and then he would get smacked down. And not smacked in a bad way, but Jesus just redirected him. Have you ever been redirected? Yes? Yeah, me too, all the time. Redirect. This is a really important thing for you guys to understand, because things that we say, we blame on life, we blame on people, we blame on circumstances and different things, but maybe you're on the potter's wheel. Maybe you're being formed. Maybe you're being reformed. Maybe it's because there's something that God is trying to do in you and through you, and you sense it deep down inside, but these things keep happening over and over again. Formation is such an important part of the Christian life, and sometimes we stay there and we get mad about it. We get angry and we resist it, but what if we stopped resisting and looked up and said, God, is this you? Have your way with me. Have your will. Whatever your will is, here I am. I don't want you to lose heart. I don't want you to give up. Because what is painful gives purpose. So finally, with Peter, we end up in a scenario where Peter's been trying, and now he's confused. He doesn't know what's going on. And it's at the end of Jesus's ministry here on earth, and they're in the upper room, and he's like, no. I would never deny you, Jesus. And Jesus is like, of course you will. You're going to do it 3 times, and you'll know because you're going to hear the rooster crow. And that's exactly what happened. Peter was everything he never wanted to be. He became a total disgrace to Jesus, to himself, probably to the disciples. The harder he tried, the more he failed, until he finally failed Jesus completely. Disgraced means having lost honor, respect, and reputation, usually because of something wrong, something shameful, something dishonorable that a person did. It often implies a fall from a position of respect or authority due to behavior. And as I tried to imagine how Peter felt, when I thought, I wonder if when he denied Jesus 3 times, it says he wept bitterly. I wonder if he thought about Judas, the most famous, infamous betrayer ever. And I wonder if he realized that, everyone thought that Judas was the betrayer, and that's why Jesus died. But maybe at that moment he thought, no, I'm the betrayer. I am Judas. I don't know if there's any lower place that one can go. And here's what I want to say to you today. I want probably the most important thing you're going to hear from me. Jesus didn't allow Peter's mistakes to destroy his mission, and he didn't allow Peter's mistakes to destroy his relationship with him. You see, Peter was holding on to this feeling of being unworthy, of letting Jesus down, of failure, of being a disgrace, of being a traitor, and he couldn't move past it. And I want to say to all of you today that is probably the biggest opponent of your calling. That's your biggest opponent of what God wants you to understand about yourself, of who you are, is what you think about yourself. And I want you to listen to these words in John chapter 21. I'm just going to read through it, and I want you to imagine that you're here. So this is after the resurrection. This is after Peter has actually seen Jesus numerous times now. So he's seen him. He knows he's resurrected, right? But he still can't move on. I mean, you would think that the resurrection would have caused Peter to go, yeah, because it did for everyone else. Listen what I love Jesus so much. Can I even tell you how much? It says, after this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. And Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. That's what men do, right? I'm getting to work. Can't think about this anymore. Let's get over here. Is that what you guys do? So you go to, so they said, and then all of them said, okay, we're going to go with you. So they all go. And they went out and they got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. It sounds like we're going back to the beginning. So going on, verse 4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? Jesus thinks of you as his child. And that is in the most loving way you can possibly imagine. They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore, said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. That's so Peter. He's like, I'm going to dive in there. Let's get there. I'm going to get there as fast as I can. I mean, he leaves all the rest of them to care for the boat. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. And when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore. There he goes again by himself. Hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now none of his disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and he gave it to them. And so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus had revealed to the disciples, after he was raised from the dead. So I want to point something out here before I go on. I learned as a parent, when my kids started to get a little bit older, that sometimes the best way to talk to them is not like this confrontational, direct eye to eye. It was more like, get in the car with me, we're going to go on a drive, and then just start talking about it. Or it was at dinner while we're eating and just bring it up. Or as Shauna and I had one talk when we were decorating the Christmas tree. She might not remember it. I won't say what it was about. You were in middle school, though. And so we were decorating the tree, and we had this conversation, a real serious conversation. And I say that because I think that's what Jesus is doing here. He's just fixing a meal by the shore, giving them, serving them, giving them bread, doing what he always did. Why was he doing that? Because his goal that day was to free Peter from his heart. It says this, verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon. He calls him Simon, right? And he renamed him Peter. Calls him Simon. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. In other words, you're still called. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. I'm going to stop reading there, Scott. He said, follow me. You know, as I was reading this, I thought sometimes conversations with Jesus hurt. Sometimes we try to hide whatever it is he's trying to get to because it's really painful to have this vulnerable conversation with Jesus about things that we don't want to talk about. But Jesus was insistent. Why? Well, 3 times Peter had denied him, and 3 times Jesus gave him the chance to say, yes, Lord, I love you. Not because Jesus needed to hear it, but because Peter needed to believe it. Not to shame Peter, but to restore him. Not to open the wound, but to heal the wound. Peter was still loved. Peter was still chosen, and Peter needed to forgive himself. And Jesus knew Peter's heart, and I want to say to all of you today that Jesus knows yours. He knows what you've been carrying. He knows what you've been hiding. He knows what happened. He knows the mistakes you've made that you've not even told anyone. He knows. But I want you to imagine right now that you're on the shore and that you are with Jesus. And he's saying, do you love me? He's not asking, do you love me, because he's questioning whether you love him or not. He wants you to love yourself. He wants you to know that he loves you and that you are worthy of whatever he's calling you to do because of what he's done for you. And you know what's interesting about Peter? He became one of the greatest eyewitnesses the early church had ever known, leading thousands to Christ after he was healed. I'm going to ask the praise team to